when we're talking about registration, remember it's synonymous with the word tax. So if we look back to the Bible times of the time of Christ's birth, we look at Luke chapter 2, verse 1, and it says, "And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed." Now, when we're looking at that word, when I looked up how it was used there, the word taxed, it's an enrollment. So it's under the Greek word that was noted at 582 in your Strong's Concordance. So it is a taxing and enrollment. So in a sense, it appears you were enrolled in, but that was again based on people that were legal participants. As we had spoken in a previous video, there's no indication that Joseph and Mary ended up registering Jesus into that registry. So that has a lot to do with the outcome that happened with the trial of Jesus, that he was not in their jurisdiction, but they were putting him in their jurisdiction and then executing a title in the legal world that said he was a king. So therefore they crossed the line and therefore were obligated for trespassing on God's property, but at the same time they falsely made him their property in a execution that went very badly for those that had a desire to make this go in an advantage for evil. It did not. It actually fulfilled God's will. So we have a king. They can't say that we don't have a king because it's historical record. He was executed as a king. King of the Jews in actuality means King of Judah, and because no tribe has ever been recognized in the international law of nations to be to be within their scope or their jurisdiction, truly his kingdom is no part of the world of Caesar. So it's completely separate. So when we look at registry again, we're going to go into Black's Law. I brought this up in a much earlier video, and we'll look at the term when something's registered into the public. So remember, a public title was required by Caesar to be in place. It did not. It induced the use of a given name to be placed on the record, but at the same time, the only thing that was required that was Caesar's was the legal title or the legal fictio. So when we go to the term "in sin you are," I mean, how obvious is that? Just break up it. In sin you are. It's Latin, Roman civil law, to register, which means to tax, to deposit an instrument with a public registry. So this instrument that was filled out by the parents was deposited into a public registry, but there's something private on there that is a problem. So I can just let you know that if anybody was requiring this record that had no authority to really obtain it, the only thing the public realm can obtain would be a sanitized copy that would not have the given name on it. I would be certain on that because of the handbook on birth registration states the fact that they will not divulge the identity of any individual. They won't show that because that's private. So they could only show the birthing of a title name, a surname, which is only for legal administrative purposes. So there it is, in sin you are, to deposit into the public registry. Now, what's interesting that I went down, we're dealing with subject matter judgment and rem, but when you look at a term, it's called the Domesday Book. Now, interesting, there's a lot of people who believe that there's a dome over the earth. I'm not going to get into a debate on this because that would not be at least the essence of this discussion here. But it's interesting that in ancient times they'd be referring to something to do with the earth and anything to do with the use of the earth in title registry as a Domesday Book. I did read one version of the Bible that actually did put it in it was a translation out of Hebrew into English that it said the firmament was a dome instead of firmament. So, but anyways, it says in here, the Domesday Book is the census or survey commissioned by William the Conqueror in 1085 and substantially completed in 1086 of England's landholdings, buildings, people, and livestock. So it was a registry of those that were claiming legal title under that crown. And so therefore they called it a Domesday Book. Later it's been called a Doomsday Book, because when you look up kingdom, it's actually King Doom. So it's, if you're on the spiritual side, don't be worried, because the legal side has a doom coming to it from God at an appointed time. But the legal side is definitely doomed, and therefore you can see the fact that they registered those who had title or claiming title within or basically granted title at that time, possibly much different than how we hold title today. But it appears that this feudal system had people that controlled by title name under a fiction that was recognized by the legal crown, and therefore people after that have just been claiming these names, even though they really can't prove any legal entitlement to them, and they just assume them, but they're related back to these lords that controlled these titles on behalf of a superior lord. So we go further. If you look, I just went into one of those ancestry sites, and they just go under surnames and titles. And again, it basically just stated very simply, surnames became necessary when governments introduced personal taxation. In England, this was known as the poll tax. Now that came into effect around that time, just shortly after that 1086 area into between that and the 1200s. The tradition of installing surnames upon people started to come into place. So anything to do with commerce or title had to be run that way. So now we're going to an interesting subject, which is in rem jurisdiction, and I'm only going to read very little of it because we're going to go over this a little bit more thorough in another video to come. But in rem jurisdiction is power about or against the thing. So if you wanted to look at this, this is actually a part of the Doomsday Book, if I wanted to say, for registration of property under whoever the top legal crown is. And it is the thing, they underline the thing that's in question. So when we read further on it, this judgment in rem is done. Power about or against the thing is a legal term describing the power of a court may exercise over property, either real or personal, or a status against a person over whom the court does have in personam jurisdiction. Jurisdiction in rem assumes the property or status is the primary object of the action, rather than personal liabilities, not necessarily associated with the property. And then it goes on, it says, within the American state court systems, jurisdiction in rem may refer to the power of the state court may exercise over real property or personal property or a person's marital status. State courts have the power to determine legal ownership of any real or personal property within the state's boundaries. So the reason for the necessary legal surname on there is so that they can govern legal title. And that's why the courts are involved with anything you could possibly think of to do with law, divorces, custody of children, because it's all based under those titles that are legal. So the court has the authority over that. So, and God basically is clear in his word when Jesus said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Certainly you were not to render what was God's in private, given to them, but that is what has happened. So we look at this is a judgment in rem, but it does not pertain to the child there unless he assumes that title, because then he's crossing the line and it will be a judgment against him because he's using property that belongs to the temporal world of the Caesars or these emperors. So further it reads, originally the notion of in rem jurisdiction arose in situations in which property was identified but the owner was unknown. Courts fell into the practice of styling a case not as John Doe, as we know it today, unknown owner of property, okay, but as ex parte, and then in brackets, property. So the state would just call their legal property property. And it says, or perhaps the awkward state versus property, usually followed by a notice by publication seeking claimants to title to the property. And then it says, this last style is awkward because in law, only a person may be a party to a judicial proceeding. Hence, the more common in personam style, and a non-person would at least have to have a guardian appointed to represent its interests or those of the unknown owner. So there's a lot going on in this, and I'm asking you to go into, you can get this, you can pull this right off of Wikipedia. I'm not saying I go there all the time, but for convenience on this part, it was there. It was matching up with the Black's Law Dictionary, which I actually downloaded a copy of that that comes up. I got that under the second edition, but they're well explaining the state's position on the title, and that's theirs, and that's as simple as that. The minute you walk into it, you're going to pay tax. So you can leave it as Caesar's and let Caesar handle his own cost factors because it already is his property. And remember, debt is just an illusion. There's no such thing. But when people enter into it and cross the line on it, it controls those that are seeking something that's not theirs. And so in a spiritual realm, we were told to store up treasures on earth, in heaven, not on earth. And so the people that are down the Gentile journey or the unbeliever journey are trying to claim as much of legal property, and that's what controls them because they haven't reached spirituality. So I hope that this has given you some enlightenment on it. I know it's a lot to digest. That's a long video. It's longer than I normally do, but at least it was within the 10 to 15 minute mark, and hopefully you got time to research this, because I think what's happening with all the belligerent divergents out there that are trying to do things, they're not realizing that they're not going to outwit God or his ordained system, and they're not going to be able to create an autocracy on their own and do whatever they please. That's not the purpose of spiritual existence right now in a material world, and therefore they may be swallowing a bitter pill going down that journey. But everything that we're sharing with you is leading to the escape, the come out, and it'll be very simple. But I wanted it to be a lead up that was stage by or step by step, so to speak, because I'm concerned that people sometimes are jumping from one thing to another thing, and they don't really understand how that legal world is operating. So I've taken as much time as I can on that to separate what is unalienable from what becomes alienable by its intermingling with something that it shouldn't be as a stranger. So hopefully this has been enlightening, and we'll be doing further videos next week.